I'm Caroline Blaze Jensen. I'm a retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. I flew the F-16 and T-38 over 3,500 hours in Iraq and with the Thunderbirds. And I'm currently a speaker, author, and looking to get back into the aviation community.
Blaze, what's going on? Welcome to the Pilot podcast.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. You, I think, the third Thunderbird I've ever talked to. Dozen and Mace. I don't know if you know who those two are.
I do. Actually, I was one of Dozen's instructor pilots.
No way. So
training.
this is just going to be tell all about Dozen, and it's either going to be good or bad for him. It can make or break his career. You know, here we go.
A couple of, maybe 1,000 students. So I remember him. Maybe I do remember he had me fly fingertip with him after he graduated, and I was about to go to the Thunderbirds. I'm pretty sure it was him. They're like, "Let's go out and just fly fingertip." It was like this. And I didn't like flying fingertip until I became a right-wing pilot.
What? So I don't fly anything fun. What does fly fingertip mean?
So in the Thunderbirds, we say as close as 18 inches to other aircraft. So
Dang.
I was the right wing looking out at the flight lead, looking for different site references to stay in that formation as we, do a 45-minute show.
That's crazy.
And all the different maneuvers. So we're not always 18 inches. That's kind of just for part of it, but it was pretty fun.
Cool. Well, we can get more into that later, but the one thing I'm more interested in right now is just the why, the why behind you becoming a pilot, you wanting to get into aviation. Just kind of start from the beginning.
Okay. I think I was bit by the flying bug really early, but it was about 6 years old, and I just saw a movie, and it had a Stearman biplane, I think, flying around in the clouds because I was 6. So it was like an open cockpit biplane flying around in clouds, and I was like super enamored with that. And my dad actually flew helicopters. He's a not World War II veteran. My grandfather's a World War II veteran. My father flew H-34s in Vietnam with the Marine Corps.
Dang.
And he worked up in the Minnesota Air National Guard. We get to go to the airfield with him sometimes and see, airplanes in the air and jumpers jumping out of the back of C-130s and dropping supplies and stuff. So I always wanted to do that. And I saw Top Gun like a lot of people of my generation, but I didn't want to be Charlie. I wanted to be Maverick,
Right.
So I went to an air show in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I saw the Thunderbirds fly. And, going to air shows, it's like kind of this patriotic feeling wells up with you. And then like you have the physical sensation of those engines going by like so close to you, you can feel it. And I was really excited about it. I looked up the United States Air Force Academy, learned everything I could about that, and had to work my tail off every day to get into there and then to survive it. But when I got on my flight to go to the Air Force Academy, it was only the 4th time I'd ever been airborne in an airplane.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
hope you like it.
Yeah. Well, I did. I had one ride in a 172 for my 15th birthday, kind of like a, familiarization flight. And I'd taken one trip to Colorado Springs to go to swim camp when I was at the academy, when I was in high school. And I'd paid for that with all my own money. So they had a glider program there, and I flew Schweitzer 233s. Luckily, I was good enough that I got selected to be an instructor, and that's where I really learned how to fly.
Awesome. Yeah. It's a good place to fly gliders.
Yeah. Well, I got about 120 hours, and it was like 15, 20 minutes at a time because we did thermal. Gosh. We would have tow planes tow us up. We'd release. We do aggravated stalls and, steep turns and manage energy, make sure that you got back to the entry point so you could fly the traffic pattern and land depending on the winds. And but it was great because I was teaching other kids, 20-year-olds kids how to fly.
Was there ever a time when you're up there flying the glider and you're like, we need a thermal bad or else we're going to be landing somewhere we don't want to land?
I luckily didn't have to do this, but there were like emergency off-field landings. So there's a football stadium kind of right underneath one side, and that was kind of the further way, I guess, to get back to the pattern. So you could land in the football stadium. I think one of my classmates had to land there, and in parking lots, they have like signs posted for rows and stuff. Sometimes I think they ended up hitting one of the posts out there. Not too bad. Everybody was okay. You're like your airspeed's pretty low
Yeah.
in those things. But yeah, there were, off-field landing procedures, and we would do it intentionally at the end of the day to put the aircraft back in the hangar. Now they have a beautiful hangar right off the side of the runway, but we'd land in this like rocky field, and it felt like you got punched in the nose by the time you like bounced to a stop, because it was not a very even field. So
So you make the most junior person do that, so you don't have to get punched in the nose anymore, right? Yeah.
No, well, we were with our students, and a lot of times
true.
you just take it, you'd slip your face off to get it down, really quick, make sure you had the energy, and then it was kind of a short landing space. But it was really fun.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
Going back a little bit to kind of, you mentioned you watched Top Gun. It's crazy just how many people can reference one movie for wanting or for getting them to want to either get into the military or into aviation. I hope Tom Cruise got some kickback or still gets kickback from all the enlisted people that they got in there. So if anyone knows if he's making any money, not like he needs any money, but he has to have something from that. The military's be like, hey, let's make a third one. We need more people. Come on.
Yeah. Well, in the Air Force, we got Iron Eagle. And, it's like, wah, wah. It's a great movie, but not the Top Gun. But, it's funny, when I traveled on the Thunderbirds and I was the only woman pilot on the team at the time, I was the only woman officer on the team my last 2 years. So I'd get asked the question all the time, like, how do we recruit more women? And I said, you need to make Top Gun again, but put a woman in it. So I was really excited that they had a character who was just a competent pilot. She was nobody's love interest. She just was herself and a pilot like everyone else, and they didn't really play up the gender differences. So I appreciate that. So thank you, Tom Cruise.
That's exactly what he was planning on doing too, right? Or maybe make an Iron Eagle 2, huh? Get a female lead Iron Eagle 2, improve it a little bit. I don't think I've ever seen it, to be honest with you, so maybe I should check it out. But if you say it's not worth it, maybe I'll skip it.
Well, let's do it.
Right now, let's go. So you have this this dream. You're 6. You're looking up. Most people when they're 6 are playing with bikes or with dolls or with GI Joes, whatever it is, Play-Doh. I don't know. But you're looking up at the sky and you're like, I want to fly an airplane. There's a lot of actionable steps that take place. You don't just become a pilot. What did you do in between that time? I know you said you went to the Air Force Academy. You worked your butt off to get in there. But kind of talk about the in-between time, the 6 to 18 of what you did to foster your love for aviation.
I literally only attended 2 air shows. I actually saw the Blue Angels fly in Grand Forks when I was about 10 or 11, and I don't remember it. Yeah. But I have a picture of me holding a Blue Angels pennant. So, I read a lot. I always loved the poem High Flight by John Gillespie McGee Jr. I had it framed and it was hanging on my wall. I would cut out pictures from magazines and got the Air Force Academy brochure and kind of pull out my pictures that were my favorite and put them in my locker in high school. And so we didn't have a lot of resources growing up. My parents were school teachers, and finances is a big barrier for entry into the aviation community for a lot of people. So had it not been for the Air Force Academy, I don't know that my dream would have come true. So a lot of it was just staying healthy and things that I needed to do to get into the academy that also make you a great pilot, like a leader and assertive and aware of your surroundings. And, I did swim team, track team, took a lot of math that they always think pilots are these great STEM people. And especially as an F-16 pilot, I struggled pretty hard with it. I actually majored in English at the Air Force Academy. So, but not shying away from that, taking that on full force and going into those courses and learning what I needed to learn, even though it was a little bit more difficult for me than the average student.
So you wanted to be Air Force, early age, it was Air Force and only Air Force, right?
I did. I actually applied to all the academies though. I got into Coast Guard Academy right away, which is an amazing school. And I think it actually is more difficult to get into that than the other academies.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then I got nominations to West Point and Annapolis, and I got a nomination to West Point. I got early acceptance to West Point and Annapolis. And I went to my Air Force Academy interview, and they had called me and they were like, well, where do you want to go? Because you don't have an acceptance to Air Force, but you do to Navy and West Point, and we can only give you one nomination. And I had to put all my put all my chips out on the table and I want to go to the Air Force Academy. And that's what happened. So it was a big gamble, but it paid off.
Yeah. One of my not high school, actually, was like childhood friends. Ever since I want to say like 4 years old, he always wanted to, he said, I want to go to the Naval Academy and I want to be a Navy pilot. And he did it. And so you're kind of in the same boat there. It's like you set out. It's crazy to me that you can be so young and be so all in on a goal. And one, when you're young, you don't understand the work that goes into that goal. So there's a lot of adversity that comes. There's a lot of moments when you're like, oh man, I don't think I can do it. I'm not good enough. And instead of hanging out with your friends playing video games, you're either trying to be an Eagle Scout, you're doing things to make your resume look good for the military. And it's really cool to see someone have goals at that age and actually do them. Because a lot of people say they want to do stuff and then it fizzles out. Things happen, roadblocks come, and some days you just want to take the easier route, and there's nothing wrong with just what I did. I went to Ohio State and just flew on my own, but it's really cool to see that you had this huge goal and you're able to not only go after it, but get accepted by every academy, which is not normal. That's really impressive.
Well, it sounds weird, and I talk about this. I'm a speaker professionally too, but you really hit on something that I haven't kind of acknowledged. And I wasn't so worried about my ability and my qualifications to get in, even though I had to work really hard to get up there. At that time, I was more worried about them accepting me. Mm-hmm. And Top Gun came out in 1986. They did not allow women into fighter cockpits until 1993. Wow. And I graduated high school in 1994. Oh, dang. So luckily, the door had just opened when I got to the academy and made everything possible. And, if I had a line number for fighter pilots, women fighter pilots, I'm probably 50, not more than 75 women at the time that had done it. I'm probably in like the top 50 or first 50 women in the U.S. that flew fighters.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Was there anyone that you specifically looked up to? Like, was it a couple classes ahead of you? Any like particular person or set of people that you look up to that kind of helped trailblaze that path for you?
Yeah. First off, like right after I saw Top Gun, I went to my Vietnam veteran dad, and he knew I wanted to fly fighters, and he was excited because he wanted me to fly something higher and faster in case I got shot at the way he did in Vietnam. So he, approved, but he definitely wanted me out of the kind of environment that he was in as a helicopter pilot. But he told me about the World War II women Air Force service pilots. So in 1942 to 1944, there were a little over 1,100 women that flew and ferried airplanes. They did all the missions except for combat and flew everything in the inventory. And they flew all the pursuit planes, P-51s, all that, good stuff too. So my dad said, look at this history, and the rules changed and they're going to change back at some point. So it's your job that if and when they do that, you're there ready to raise your hand and you're ready to go. So that gave me a lot of motivation and inspiration. And later on in my career in life, I got to be friends with quite a few WASP, and I'm getting goosebumps just even thinking about it, how lucky I am to have. I have one good friend who's 103 and she's still alive. Just spoke with her yesterday. She's fantastic. B-25 was her favorite aircraft. So that's really what kept me going. And my freshman year at the academy, now retired General Jeannie Leavitt came to the Air Force Academy with her squadron commander. She was like a captain at the time. And they had like a optional meeting in Electonar. There were maybe like 50 cadets who went in there. But I just remember sitting there and looking at her and just being in awe, and I wanted it so bad, and I just wanted to be able to be accepted into that community. And oddly enough, Nicole Malachowski, who a lot of people know, the first woman Thunderbird, when I got into the glider squadron, she was the squadron commander, and they're also like in that program there were like 4 women out of 50 per class, or maybe 2 or 3 women in each class that flew the gliders. So it wasn't a lot. So Nicole, who later went on to be a Thunderbird, she's been a mentor and someone I looked up to and a good friend for a long time.
As we'll get into more of kind of the training and what that was like, but I want to touch on what you think is important for someone that has the same goal as you, whether it's at age 4, 6, whatever it may be, but wants to go military, wants to specifically go to the academy. We kind of touched on a little bit how it's a process, right? Like, there's a lot of boxes you need to check, and you just have to hope that they accept you, because there's a lot of other people that can check the same boxes, get the same letters, get everything like that. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to who's reading your paper or who you know. Yeah. But what would you recommend for someone that really wants this. Let's say we can give it 2 steps. You know, if you're that young kid that's 8 years old that watches Top Gun with their dad or their mom, is like, I want to do that. Like, all right. And then also if you're, say, like a little bit later, like 13, middle schoolish, getting ready to go into high school, what would you recommend?
I love those people, and I do a lot of free mentoring, and you know, I always loved seeing those kids on the flight line when we landed, and you know, people want to put you in a box, right?
Right.
If you're going to be a fighter pilot or a military pilot, and it's generally not a young woman who was lived on a farm for the first 7 years of her life in Wisconsin. So don't let people tell you, oh well, it's hard to get in there because you need a nomination. Like, I actually had people say that. My guidance counselor, like, there was the ASVAB, which is a military screening test, and it's not mandatory if you're going to go in and get commissioned, but like, they're like, oh, you don't have to be here because we don't have enough seats. And I'm like, but I want to go in the military, and like, there's not that many kids in my class. Like, why would you excuse me from doing this? And
right.
So just like weirdly had no support. I had a teacher too who failed me on a paper that I wrote about becoming a pilot someday. And it literally, the night I was writing out my final draft, the news flash with the first 3 women fighter pilots from the Pentagon was like on the TV, and I went in the next morning, turned in that paper, and it was like little Ralphie and the Red Ryder BB gun. So excited, and she literally failed me on it. And when I went in to talk to her, she didn't really think women should be in the military, much less in combat or flying airplanes. And she saw how much time and research I took and how educated I was on my decision, and she gave me a D instead of an F on the paper. So
it's so nice of her. Yeah, to give you the D, not the F. It's like, thank you. Yeah. Jeez.
Or people be like, oh, you need to have a private pilot's license. And a lot of the young folks that I talk to are, heads and shoulders above where I was as far as like aviation experience and, early graduation and 4.9 GPAs or whatever.
Yeah, it's crazy. How's that possible?
But don't let that intimidate you, right? So there's going to be steps along the way where people don't think that it's the thing for you. I'm also like, a lot of pilots are afraid of heights. I don't like roller coasters. I think it's like
me either.
Horrible way to die. I'd rather be in control, so there's just these misconceptions. And today you have great resources in the internet to go on there and find websites that talk about what you want to do, like really get into and try to get connected with people who are in the community that you think you want to go into. And you might change your mind too. I was lucky that I had a kind of one track mind in my goal and it worked out, but you might change your mind. You might decide it's not for you, but there's a lot of work and research that you can do without money to figure out what you're going to do. And there's a lot of people out there like me that want to mentor and help people who want to be in our position and, ask questions. And a couple parents too have been like really worried about, current climate and policies and stuff like that. I'm, happy to talk to people about that.
Do you think there's an age where it's almost too late for you for the academy? Like freshman year, is it too late for you to start the process of going? Sophomore year, is it something you really need to start kind of planning for and preparing for earlier than that?
I needed to start earlier. I don't think I would have gotten the grades I got had I not had that goal the whole way through. There's those 1% type folks who are captain of everything and get A's across the board. I had to have the goal to motivate me to do better academically. So for me to start at 12, it was great. I literally just talked to one of my 1998 graduate classmates last night, and he was like, yeah, I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I didn't decide until like my junior year. Like junior year is when you want to have everything in. And I was like, man, you're smart, because I wouldn't have made it if I hadn't. I needed the motivation. I had to take the ACTs 4 times to get my math score into the acceptable range that would make me competitive to go to the academy. So yeah, it depends, but I don't think it's ever too early to start.
Yeah.
And too late. I mean, there's people who apply and don't get in, and they go to like a preparatory school. Air Force Academy has its own prep school. Some people go to college or community college and just get, maybe you didn't get the grades you wanted in high school, and all of a sudden, a bolt of lightning came out of nowhere, and you're like, this is what I want to do, and I want to go to one of the academies. You can still go to college work through there, go to ROTC, get good grades, apply, and go later. And, sometimes like when you show that you really want it, like you really need to want to be in the military, and enjoy it, especially in aviation where it's, a lot to study, a lot to know. Like flying an airplane is like walking and breathing, right? Like I needed to know what the ground threats are and the air threats are and, different missiles and capabilities. And then I'm flying a single engine airplane with really complicated systems. So I need to know if something happens, out of the ordinary, how to handle that. So, just manipulating controls of an airplane was like, that was, not my primary focus. So you kind of got to be good at that too. But it comes.
I did my airline training. Two of my really good friends that I met there. We're kind of trauma bonded for life through airline training. But I mean, this. If you're in the military, you love telling your military stories. Yeah. So they would just go back and forth. I'm just like, you told that last week. Okay, this is a new one. I'll listen. But he was kind of one of my buddies, Mike in Miami. If he's listening to this, what's up, dude? Mike. Hi, Mike. He was talking about just like you get pimped almost. My wife's a doctor, so I don't know if anyone doesn't know what pimping is. Just like randomly we could ask questions, right? They have you stand up, recite stuff all the time, put you on the spot. Not necessarily something you've been studying for the last couple of days, but something that you need to know, you need to remember. And he was just talking about memorizing checklists, and I think one of them was an emergency checklist where you're like, you have to evacuate, you have to pull the chute, you got to get out, and you're upside down, and it's just trying to remember everything and how long the steps are. And it's just like, dude, try this. Like this one is nothing. You need to know 4 things for this airline. It's like, this is like 13 things that you had to recite, do in a particular order to save your life. I was like, dang, I'll be good with my airline checklist.
Yeah, there's critical action procedures, CAPS, or we'd have boldface. That would be emergency procedures and things that you need to know without looking because you just don't have time to look them up. Like an abortion or abort. Sorry, that's stupid. An abortion. Like an abort on takeoff, you have to know how to do that because you don't have time to look it up. One of the favorite things to do is like loss of canopy, and you just like take their checklist and like throw it across the room. I was also an instructor in pilot training as my first assignment. So I got to, turn around and kind of put people under the microscope. But I want to say that I was doing it for their own good. I wasn't really one of the people who took joy out of like scaring people and putting them on the spot. So and I was an evaluator too as a young captain. So I a lot of times I asked the same questions, and and a lot of it was like, hey, the caution lights in your aircraft, like those are really good systems knowledge, like what makes them go on, what makes them come off, and then goes into like the emergency procedure. So it's like really good systems knowledge that's applicable to you as you're flying your airplane,
right?
Versus just trying to haze somebody, giving them EPs and multiple emergency procedures. So
I feel like there's certain people that just have way too much joy in having that over someone and just being able to put them on the spot, and they love tripping people up.
And then they get down to like, how many rivets are in the underside of the, blah, blah, blah. Like, seriously, do I need to know that?
No one needs to know that. So. It's like, you probably don't even know that.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you how many rivets there are. Yeah, probably want to go well. Let's go to your first day. You show up at Academy. Were you one of few out of women that wanted to be in aviation? Did you find others that were like, I want to be a pilot too. Let's do this together.
Yeah. Your first day at the Academy, you're at attention. You're like holding knowledge in front of your face and like studying it, and you're run all over at high altitude. Collecting all of the stuff that they issue. It's like 3 bags worth of stuff, and you're dragging them across the track. So honestly, I didn't even know like almost how many people are around me, because if you looked around, they'd like yell at you for gazing. And so it was like straight into the deep end with like, a cinder block tied around your waist. So it took a little bit of time. My roommates that I had that were women, one of them wanted to fly, the other ones didn't. Like one wanted to do law and, acquisitions and other things. So, that's kind of a misconception about the Air Force too. There's like the majority of the Air Forces don't fly and even aren't air crew or, pilots. So there's a lot of amazing people that support the force so that the Air Force can employ the way that it does. And they're all important. You don't have to be manipulating the controls or be part of air crew. So I forget what your question was. I got off on a tangent there.
No, just talking about being around other women at the Air Force Academy that wanted to be pilots. Just how many were there? Or was it just like you said, just you and your roommate?
Yeah, no. So when I got glider upgrade, I was the only woman upgrading during my section. There were 3 other women in my class that did it. I met Nicole Malachowski. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 in her grade or her class year. There was like 1 ahead of me. And we didn't get to talk a lot all the time. Like, I don't know. It's just because you're doing your job and, learning how to fly an airplane is on top of like a completely full academic load and other responsibilities when you go to military school. There's like a lot of administration just to run a squadron. So you're doing those jobs as well. So I didn't really have any close women friends. And the really good news is that I did have a lot of male friends and supporters and, people that helped me succeed. Most of the naysayers were kind of like, didn't have the courage to speak up and say things to my face as much. Like there are a couple things here and there, but I don't know. It still happens in the aviation community as far as like women are concerned, but
for sure.
I find out if someone makes like kind of a snide comment, I just like, what do you mean? Like, can you explain that? Or,
say more. Yeah.
I have a really good friend and, she's a 787 captain. I love this story. And she's an African-American woman, a Black woman. And there was, someone riding in the jump seat and he has a friend who's trying to get hired by the majors and he's like, well, he hasn't gotten hired, and he applied to all these places. And she's like, I can hear where this like conversation is going. And she's like, let's wait till we land. And of course he's like, yeah, my friend can't get hired because of all these minorities and like women that are getting hired. And she's like, you know what? There's like less than 200 professional Black and African-American women pilots. And she's like, which one of my freaking friends took your friend's job? Like no one gets here without meeting the standards, and a lot of people who are under the microscope, like the way kind of minorities are, like you have to be 2 times, 3 times better than people around you. It feels like a lot of the time. So, and
the audacity of someone to say that, like what gives you the nerve, to even think that, or even to bring like, oh, this is a good idea. Let me bring this up to someone right now. Like, why would you think
in the middle of a transatlantic flight? Like, let's talk about this when we land.
What did you think was going to happen?
I'll buy you a beer and school you later.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
So I don't know. Wild. It's kind of like confirmation bias, when you like something kind of pops up and you're like, man, look at how prevalent it is. Well, it's really not that prevalent. Like women only still make up about 6%. I think maybe I heard an 8% number of women pilots. So it's even with all the Top Guns and all the female, there's Blue Angels just got their first female pilot, and Air Force Thunderbirds have had, they just hired another woman, and so there's like 6 now that have been women pilots on the Air Force Thunderbirds. So, even with all that, it's not really making a dent too much.
Yeah. You're kind of answering what my next question was going to be, but more specific in your experience at the academy. You mentioned that when you got there, it was kind of new for letting women fly fighter jets or letting women fly in the academy in general. Was there any pushback at all? Could you notice any like hesitancy of wanting to give you a spot? Or was it truly just like, hey, you can do this just as much as someone else. Here are all the resources and it's all the same and let's go.
Yes to both. I think I got really good at not listening to the haters because, and I like to tell this to my, teenage son, like other people's opinion of you are none of your business, right? Like the airplane doesn't know if you're a man or woman or, what religion or, any of those different determining factors are. You just go do your job and, I'm going to do me and I'm going to be the best me. And one of the most effective ways to lead is by example. And you can't deny when you go out and you do your mission, you have the great landings and pilot training, you get a good, score on your check ride, or, you shoot down all your targets in a large force engagement. Like you can't deny it. So just be your best and do your best. And, we'd like to have, parties, roll calls. There'd be a little bit of drinking, a little bit of liquid courage sometimes. So I actually had someone come up to me at the end of my tour in Korea, and he's like, you know what, Blaze? I never wanted to be in a squadron with a woman before, but you're all right. And I'm like, wow, I don't know how to take that. I'm glad I changed your mind, maybe, but there's other chicks out there that are all right.
Yeah. You're like, thanks.
Yeah.
I think
maybe you should switch to water now.
Yeah. What do you say back to that in a situation? Like in the moment, you're like, okay.
No, I don't know. I guess because it's kind of a privilege in a way. And I don't want to excuse poor behavior on the side of my squadron mates, but it's also a little bit of a privilege that I got to come into this community that was predominantly male, and with that growth, there comes some issues like that to deal with. And, a lot of times, I know where I stack up to him, and I don't know, it's not worth getting in an argument over or starting anything. And the best times where situations like that would kind of come up, one of my bros would step in. And I'm sure that there were plenty of times when I wasn't in the room and people said something bad about maybe me or women pilots. I know that my bros stood up for me.
Love it.
I moved back to my hometown, and in my hometown, there's an Annapolis graduate. He's a couple of years behind me, and he was a flight surgeon. He flew also, so in the Navy. And I ran into his brother downtown. He's like, hey, my maiden name was Bong. He's like, you're Bong. He's like, we were out hunting with my brother and a bunch of his Navy bros, and with the, potential new Secretary of Defense and his stance against women in combat. They kind of had that come up as a topic of conversation. He said a lot of the guys were like, yeah, women don't really belong there. And he's like, my brother was like, yeah, but Bong, she's really good. She does. So again, it's like, I'm glad I could, put a good face on combat aviation for women, but you got to give everybody a chance. It's
for sure.
Either you can do it or you can't. There's plenty of men who won't be able to manipulate the controls of a multi-million-dollar airplane at, close to the Mach, and go to a tanker and manage the multitasking that's required in a fighter cockpit. And, multitasking in aviation is a key capability that you need, and it's kind of tenfold in the F-16 or in the fighter community. So just, work on your skills and judge people for how well they perform, and not their gender.
For sure. And I like what you said, that you can either do it or you can't, right? There comes a time you're going to be tested, and it can go one of two ways. You did it or you didn't do it. Yep. So you have to perform. It's kind of like every check ride, right? Yeah. You have to perform on a certain day to make sure you are doing things to a certain rate or whatever they're looking for, and you either do it or you don't. And if you can do it, cool, welcome, let's go, join the group, let's do it. And no questions asked.
Yeah. And going back to your question about how do you get there? Well, you don't quit either, right? So if you have a bad check ride and you screw something up, or you're weak in certain areas, if you want to do it, then do it. Nobody experiences success without failure, right? There's always going to be headwinds and difficulty and obstacles and roadblocks. And, it may be more for some people than others, but you're definitely not going to make it if you quit.
Yeah. And I feel so I played sports my whole life, and I feel like the teamwork that goes around sports is similar to the teamwork that goes around military or in aviation in general. And as someone, when you want to go to quote unquote battle, we would call it in sports, obviously it's not battle at all, right? It's just a game. But you want to know that the person next to you has been through adversity. You can count on them when times get tough. And in aviation, you overcoming adversity really makes you, I think, a better problem solver, a better pilot, a better person, because you know that when times get tough, you can go ahead and go above and beyond and perform. So learning from those mistakes is more important than the actual mistake you make. It's how you bounce back. It's how you come back and pass the check ride again. And even if you want to go to the airlines, they're going to ask you why, and they genuinely want to know why. They want to know how you were able to overcome that adversity. They're not necessarily worried about the failure itself. They're more worried about how you handled that situation and what you did to overcome it.
Yeah. One of the best compliments that I've ever had, or that you could give a fellow service member, is that you'd go to combat with them, because their capability and their performance of their job affects everyone's safety, including theirs. So I do remember when I was a first assignment instructor pilot in Del Rio, Texas. It's called a FAPE. And there was one woman in the squadron when I got there. She went on to fly F-16s, and then I was the only one for a while. We had a couple of women students, and then one of them became a FAPE with me too in the T-38.
Yeah.
But when my squadron commander left, he like rattled off every single person's call sign, and it was kind of funny because there's call signs, but he was like, I would go to battle with you guys like any day. And I remember it was like standing at attention, and it's just this one little moment, and he meant it, and was just such a great commander. And he was like this proud Eagle pilot, like total fighter pilot, and just was awesome, and made sure that I had the right opportunities and got the right credit too for what I did. So it was pretty cool.
Shout out to him.
Yeah. Hey, Bodine.
There you go. When talk about your progression to in the military of we talked about gliders, but what came next? Was it an application to actual fighter jets? Was it an application to kind of the training program? And then talk about kind of your path to getting Thunderbird and kind of how it all worked out.
Okay. Well, I'm very non-standard also. So after graduation from the Air Force Academy, I also flew the Slings BT-3 Firefly program, and at the academy they unfortunately had 3 fatal accidents that killed both the student and the instructor pilot, so 6 altogether. And I was in the airplane. I was about to turn on the electric driven boost pump, and the engine quit, and my crew chief was like, yeah, we wouldn't let you fly this anyway, because that one over there had an engine, like fuel cavitation was what was happening. And when you go back to idle, the prop would keep windmilling, and it was very almost undiscernible, apparently, that when it quit while it was windmilling, when you push the throttle back in, you didn't realize that you didn't have an engine, or it would quit. So that was kind of one of the issues. But I was like one ride short of them going, okay, you've had enough T3 time to go to pilot training. And I also didn't have a pilot's license. So they sent me to Centennial Airport in Colorado, gave me 40 hours and said, do whatever you want. Like, you just need to solo. And so I got my PPL in like 36 hours or something like that. I had a couple left to play with at the end. And then I went to pilot training, and I came back as a first assignment instructor pilot in the T-38, which was awesome. Like, you're 23 years old and you've got the keys to a supersonic jet with another 20-something-year-old, as your student. Right? Yeah. But it was, that was a lot of trust, and man, I loved it. It was a really good assignment. And
is it common for someone to finish kind of training and go straight into instructing?
Yeah, every class, and things have changed a lot in pilot training since I went through, but there's usually like 1 or 2 first assignment instructor pilots that come back. So they've changed the way that they award wings now. So I would have to ask someone like currently what it's like.
All good. Yeah. Good.
But yeah, it was common back then for us to go straight in, but man, you get so much airmanship. We'd go cross country all the time, and a lot of fighter pilots, take off from base X, go fly around the flagpole and come back and land, and they don't operate in the national airspace. So I got to go and, be cross country flying to Class B. I flew internationally. I flew through Canada up to Alaska for an air show at one point in the T-38, which was really interesting because it's, not air refuelable, and it took 5 hops to get there. It's from Texas. So there were just so many awesome experiences that you can't get anywhere else, and you can't beat the price, right?
Yeah,
like at this first rate training, and you are paying for it with your blood, sweat, and tears. But there were so many awesome experiences. I feel so lucky that I did that.
Yeah. That sounds like a sweet opportunity, like you said, being 23 or whatever the age was, and then go ahead instructing new people and kind of molding them into the pilot the Air Force wants and what you think that they need to be. Did you feel like it was easy for you to make the transition from student to instructor, especially with someone, there's a lot of, when people become instructors, the first couple hours, like, how am I teaching someone something? It's like, I barely even know what to do. But what was the confidence level like when you're going into that?
So after I graduated from pilot training, and before I came back as an instructor, they had a PIT class, pilot instructor training. That's what that stood for. So, this is how you do a traffic pattern stall. And, it sounds like little mice running on the wingtips. And then when it sounds like elephants stomping, like that's when you're getting into the stall. There are like all of these like, kind of things that we memorized. And I think I flew maybe 40, 50 hours during pilot instructor training, which like internalized everything that I had learned through pilot training, and some of the pressure was gone. And so I could just like really fly the airplane and learn how to fly the plane. So by the time I got back to Del Rio, I felt like really good about it. And then you've got guys coming in that hadn't flown a T-38 in 8 years, and they'd been out flying over Bosnia in an F-16, getting shot at by SA-3s. And one of my buddies who did that was like, I've never been in more danger than I've been in pilot training, and I've been shot at before. So yeah, because I mean, they don't know anything. And I mean, it's just great. I love being a single seat pilot too. And, I'm going to get into the civilian flying here in a little bit, but I didn't really enjoy having an instructor in the back seat, especially when I was, it's like just an upgrade sometimes because they just giving you input. Like I don't really need input to fly this plane, and I'm training to fly a plane that, only has one seat in it. So Thank you very much. But yeah, so that was really different. But, I'll tell you, so after pilot training, I went to instructor, it was called IFF, Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals. So after pilot training, I went to IFF, Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals, and I flew the T-38A. It was like 1,300 hours as an instructor. And I go to the T-38C, which now has updates like some glass in the cockpit, a heads-up display. And I tell you what, it was harder for me to learn how to fly a T-38C, even though I had 1,300 hours in the plane, than it was for me to learn to go from the T-38C to the F-16.
Really?
Yeah, because like
crazy.
You've been looking at the same place for your, engine, and like I want to see what my oil pressure is doing right now, or my EGT, or exhaust gas temperature, and it's not where it was for the last 3 years. So everything that was like that second nature, like this is like walking, you had to put deliberate energy into like getting the data that was just like you didn't even realize that you were taking in before. So that was tough. But
it's like mental space you didn't know you were wasting because you knew where to look. And now you're like, wait, I don't look there. And then you're 2 seconds behind now.
Yeah. And then like looking through the heads up display and, like where you get your information, and the T-38C heads up display, the HUD was the same as the F-16. So that was great that I got to learn that. And so then I went to Luke Air Force Base for F-16 training. And my first flight, I got to go out to the range, and we did some strafing, and there's a couple 2-seat F-16s out there. And so I was in one of those, and the gun is literally like you're sitting right next to it. It's like outside the airplane, but it's inside the airplane, but outside the cockpit. So this guy was like, it's going to go off, and you're going to know exactly when it's going to go off. It's still going to scare the crap out of you. And sure enough, it just like, it rattles your whole, like everything. And like, we're precise with that thing when we practice, but I swear it's like almost hard to see because it's like everything's shaking, like the jet shaking, your body shaking. But
like your bones, like things inside, like you're just like, your brain's shaking. Yeah.
Like, holy cow. Like that was awesome.
Do it again.
Yeah. So that was great. So after F-16 training at Luke, I went to Korea and flew there for a year. And the biggest thing I learned there was a lot of weather, like horrible weather. And I already had a lot of experience flying. So I was one of the people that was like down to a lower weather category. So they'd be like, Blaze, come to the desk. And some like lucky lieutenant would get to go study in the vault, and I'd take off and fly in like 301. And we'd break out of the sun at like 30,000 feet, or break out of the clouds and see the sun at 30,000 feet. And then go right back in, all the way back, and radar trail. And F-16 radars don't like humidity and moisture. So sometimes your radar would break lock, and then that was the only way that we knew where our flight lead was. You had an idea, but you're turning and getting vectored around. So I learned a lot there too about when to speak up and when not to, and how the systems work. And it was fun. But man, you know what? I felt lucky that I was probably the only person on the Korean peninsula many days to see the sun.
Oh, I see. Never been to Korea before. I never knew that it was so cloudy and the weather was bad.
Well, that year we also had like this, we called it the snowfoon. It was like a typhoon of snow, like every day for weeks we kept getting snow. So, and there are a couple good days, but there was a lot of them were really bad weather. So after Korea, I went to Hill Air Force Base and I deployed to Iraq, and I flew for 6 months, over 200 hours of combat in Iraq in '07 and '08. And we were actually there during what they called the surge. Al-Qaeda had stepped up their attacks, and the Air Force, or the United States had decided that we were going to like take action. So we were pretty busy employing over there at the time, which was, I don't know, I felt like the Thunderbirds was really cool, but I really felt like everything that I worked for was to be there and to be competent and to help save the lives of, the United States soldiers and our allies there. So it was a really rewarding time. And I got home from that, and I decided I wanted to leave active duty after 10 years. And I got pregnant without planning to get pregnant. My ex-husband, we both separated. We were both flying, and we both quit our jobs. And then I got pregnant, and I was like, oh, shoot. So
here we go. Yeah, get me a mom.
I know. I'd signed up to be a part-time reservist. Yeah, so I went from steely-eyed fighter pilot to pregnant. It was a tough swing for me. But my son's like the best thing in the whole world. So
yeah, love it.
So then I went and flew T-38s again at Shepherd Air Force Base, the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, which is awesome. All the different cultures that you get to work with there. And then I was like up in the middle of the night with my infant, and I saw the mail on the counter, and there was a reserve magazine called Citizen Airman, and they had a little blurb in it about the first reserve pilot who'd been selected for the Thunderbirds. And I was like, oh, I want to do that.
It's gonna be me.
So then It happened. I applied. Great support coming out of the woodwork too. Like the wing commander had seen all of the great work that I had done in Iraq. The JTACs, the people controlling our attacks, seemed to be partial to the women on the radio.
Oh, really?
My call sign was Ninja, and my whole squadron was Ninja, and everyone in the squadron was extremely proficient and competent, and we had a great reputation with the guys on the ground. Like, if your life is in danger, like, you want Ninja there.
That's awesome.
But there were 3 women in our squadron, which was like probably the most I've ever had at one time. So, so the other commanders would give him a hard time that he had a harem of women down there. But they really liked having us. But so the vice wing commander that had been at Hill was at Shepherd, and he knew I was applying, and he came in one day and he sat down. He's like, Blaze, is there anything I can help you with? Anything going on? And I knew exactly what he was talking
for anything
about.
At all? Yeah. Have you seen this opening?
And he was accepting all of the applications from the active duty, but I was reserve. And so he didn't have to do anything for me. And he wrote me a letter of recommendation. It was awesome. Even if I hadn't gotten it, it was such a great experience to go and ask these commanders I'd had in the past to write me a letter. And just some of the great things that people said about you was like, that was meaningful.
Was this always a goal of yours? Was this like kind of like the end goal? Like, what you wanted to do, what was the plan to do all this and stay active duty and then go to Thunderbirds? Or did this all just kind of happen? Like, you literally just looked down at the magazine and you're like, hey, cool, I can do this as a reserve. Let's go.
I loved watching the Thunderbirds fly. But my dad was a Vietnam combat pilot. His father, my grandpa, was in the Coast Guard, and he would tell us about capturing German submarines and like shooting, giant shells, like giant guns off the deck, and he was like clearing hot brass off the deck. And my grandma on my mother's side too joined the Coast Guard, and it was a program similar to the WASP where they could free up men to go into combat. So she did a lot of like clerical and office works and like running from the land-based headquarters to the boat and stuff like that. So I didn't want to go to combat. Like, nobody in the United States does, but you train for war and you pray for peace. And I just felt like I owed it to my family that if we ever get in that situation, that's what I would be ready for and train for. Yeah. So the Thunderbirds was not something, but hello, like it'd be cool to do that. And I also thought you had to be like completely a perfect pilot. And here's a secret: Thunderbird pilots mess up too. Like everyone's human, and it's just flying. Like certain aircraft have certain errors, the way they're designed, that you're kind of driven to. And it's being a better pilot is you catch yourself earlier than like a newer pilot will let things go too far to a dangerous level. And when you're more experienced, like you can stop things. Like it might be a potato where you're like, 1 second, like, oh yeah. And you can fix that. But
yeah, you're like, I know where this is going. I need to stop this now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what's great about being an instructor too, because you can sit there and be like, oh, he's going to do this and he's going to do that and that. And you're like, yep, sure enough. And I even told you were going to do all that in the brief and you still did it.
I know. At some point you have to make the mistake on your own though, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like you really only learn when you just mess it up and you're like, oh, that's why we don't want to do that. It's like, we almost died. Okay. I'm not going to do that again.
And that's it. It like sinks in and you like internalize those lessons and, that's really important. So
yeah, that's when you're like, just don't do it again, please.
Yeah. So, I also love the F-16 and it was a great way to get back there. And then just to kind of represent a different demographic and help, be that person that other people can see and, young girls, and see somebody that kind of reminds them of themselves and open up some new possibilities. Yeah. But I'm also a boy mom. I have one son and it means a lot to me that he's not going to limit the women in his life to certain roles because he grew up with, a fighter pilot mom. So.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, my wife is a doctor. She's doing some really cool stuff. And knowing that my son will be able to look up to her and be like, well, hey, look what women can do, or look what my mom can do. I think that's really cool to have. And your son is doing the exact same thing, when he's at school and the kids are like, yeah, my dad does this. And you're like, well, my mom was a fighter pilot and flew the Thunderbirds and did this. And they're just like, okay, your mom's cooler than my dad. Cool, thanks.
Well, he used to think like everyone's parents were Thunderbird pilots because
no way.
A bunch of the kids from the team went to the same school, and that's who we'd hang out with on the weekends at air shows and stuff like that. So I got held over for a third year because we got sequestered in 2013. So we got an extra bonus year on the team, and I'm glad for it because he was 6 then and he understood it a lot more.
That's cool.
And, that was neat.
That's really cool.
Yep. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you're flying combat, I have a couple buddies who are in the military. I talked about the other ones because they're separate buddies, but they mention how, when you're just sitting in the office or when you're just flying around the United States, you don't really necessarily feel like this is their words, this isn't my words, that they're really like doing much. They're just flying to fly, they're flying to train. Obviously you're training for combat, but there's a difference between training for combat and actually being in combat and feeling like, they both told me that the sense of kind of like self-worth or actually doing the mission that you're training for was so fulfilling in what they're doing, and knowing that you're either making a difference of people on the ground or making a difference in a war or a group movement. Did you feel that too, kind of being over there? Yeah,
I definitely did. And like in the fighter community, we set up scenarios all the time. And so we're always practicing it, but definitely when you get there, I always thought of the phrase, failure is not an option, right? And like what that meant to me before that experience was like, man, I can't screw up because everything's going to fall apart if I don't. And when I got in there, it was like, I'm trained, I can handle anything. Like failure is not an option because I can handle whatever curveball you throw at me. Like there was no doubt in my mind that if my engine quit, I knew what to do. Or if someone got pinned down by, the enemy, like I knew what to do. Or, like running out of gas and like helping out my wingman and bringing in another set of fighters. Like we were just so well trained, and it wasn't like a cocky confidence. It was like I know what to do, and people's lives are at stake. And so in that way, it was like really rewarding and really fulfilling. And for the most part, like I had some leadership duties to do, but you like sleep, fly, work out, eat, sleep, fly, work out, eat. So life is, pretty simple, and it's nice, and you get to focus on the fun things.
It sounds like paperwork is a big thing in the military world. And when you don't have to do paperwork and you can just eat, sleep, fly, work out, I feel like that's kind of the best idea for a military pilot. Yeah.
Well, and we had a lot of stress because you'd have to have your, after we got back, if you employed weapons, you had like a colonel on base show up and like look at your tapes. And so the whole flight back to the base after you're done with your missions, you're like, did I do that right? Did I do that right? And
so they're like judging every decision.
Oh yeah. They're like, pause, like I did this, after being in the plane for 3 hours at night, managing all these issues. And then when I hit that pickle button, man, I hope everything lined up the way it was supposed to. And, it did like 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And even the ones that were a little bit out of parameters still had the desired effects.
Good.
So, yeah.
It worked.
So, I don't know. It was like really rewarding to be doing what you were training to do.
Yeah.
And to be part of the team too. Like I loved pulling up on the tanker after I dropped my first bombs, and the boomer was like so excited. I was like, oh my gosh. Like,
you did it.
Yeah. I didn't have to say anything. Like he was just looking to, like
That's awesome.
see how we were doing. So, they're part of the mission just like we were. So
Yeah. And we talked about how awesome it is to be such a great role model to your son. When your son asks questions about what you do, how do you answer those questions? Do you go into full detail? Do you kind of spare no details just so he knows kind of what mom did, like, and what the risks were, what the reward was, and what you actually had to do? Or is it just kind of like, I fly airplanes, I do all this? Kind of talk a little bit about explaining what you do and did in the military to your son.
I think he grew up with it ingrained. We didn't really hide anything from him. So his dad's also a, former F-16 pilot. So he grew up around it. And I think he's interested in being in the military.
Cool.
Like me, he's only flown a handful of times. So that might be something I can give him. He's a sophomore. I can give him some experience before he graduates from high school to see if that's a route that he wants to take. And there's a lot of video games with a lot of like killing. He loves doing airsoft, and he's like, yeah, maybe I want to do this. I was like, every time one of those BBs hits you, like if that was a real bullet in real life, like you have to think about that. The real world ramifications for doing something like this. But there's some like difficult questions surrounding combat and weapons employment, and I really thought people would ask me on the Thunderbirds, and nobody asked me till I got to a ROTC squadron. And I was like, well, I'm going to answer these things honestly for you because this is what you're signing up to do potentially, when you graduate and when you get commissioned. So, it's war. Like I said, we don't want to do that, but there were some really awful things that Al-Qaeda, Iraq was doing in the country. And, we had guys getting blown up by roadside bombs, like Americans, on a regular basis, and to be able to stop that and look for that, find people digging holes, find hot spots on the side of the roads, like all those things that we did in combat definitely saved lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so when you're in that process and you find someone, it's just like you see someone digging a hole, do you just like shoot, or is it like a whole? I was gonna say
there's a long process, and there's like a ground commander who's like in a command and control center, like pretty far removed. He's got his cup of coffee and he's been to the restroom and he's got a good night's sleep and all that stuff. He's like helping to make the final employment
he can
decision.
think through it.
Yeah. But, two kind of off the wall kind of stories. One night there was a town that there was an intersection and they'd had a lot of bombs. So like, we're going to go into this town. We're going to look at this. Well, I see 4 people sitting around like this, like glowing hole, and they're like getting ready to drop on them. And I was like, great. Like, it doesn't look like they're digging anything. And sure enough, it was like good guys, Iraqi security forces making tea in the middle of the night. Like, holy cow. Like if we hadn't double, triple, quadruple checked, like that could have been really ugly. And then this one's kind of comical. Like one person got in a car and they like drove, we like see them and they pulled over and you see them like digging a hole. Well, they were going to the bathroom, but the targeting pod is so like picks up thermal differences so much that it looked like there's like a hole and then you can see a temperature difference from whatever went into the hole. And it's like, dude, that guy almost like got smoked because he had to go to the bathroom. So it was, it wasn't that close, but you have to take some
just
time.
The idea that you can just be going to the bathroom and then, a couple minutes later, it's lights out, game over, right? It's like, dang, just
you wouldn't even know
what's your time, man?
Yeah. A lot of it was at night too. Like people don't do that during the day. I assume they don't anyway, but, and then the thermal difference is a lot different at night too, for the targeting pod to be able to see the IR picture. So it was kind of comical, and he didn't almost get, but that's where you have to do your due diligence and make sure. And then, we got smart and be like, hey, can you check with whoever's local there and see if there's any patrols out or, to make sure that we got the right people. I went to Congress right after my Thunderbird tour, and one of the congressmen, I won't say the name, but he was like, why are jets coming back with bombs on the rails? That's, we need to be getting rid of all of our bombs when our fighters go out. Like, well, sure as heck, we do not need to be doing that, because bad things would happen if you don't, you need the kind of that human and a couple people in the chain to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Also, just shooting bombs to shoot bombs sounds expensive, right? Like, they're not cheap.
Yeah.
When you're moving on to the Thunderbirds, it's a completely different mentality from flying in combat. I say that like I know it. I obviously don't, but just from the outside looking in, it's a complete different mentality, right? Like, obviously you're a team, you have a mission, but your mission isn't necessarily to save people on the ground. It's to promote the Air Force. It's to promote Thunderbirds, promote flying, to promote America and a brand, right? Talk about the mentality of you kind of flipping that switch of your mission of what you're doing.
Well, the Air Force Thunderbirds are a team that represents the pride, precision, and professionalism of the entire Air Force. And I also kind of include the Department of Defense in that. Mm-hmm. So it's really difficult flying. There was one of the pilots had been through weapon school, and he was like, this is harder than going through weapon school, which is like our Top Gun. And like, you're exhausted. We'd fly twice a day, every single day. And you start out at higher altitudes with maybe 2 aircraft, and you learn how to do a loop and a roll. And then, you add more airplanes, and you gradually like step down, you gradually increase the number of aircraft, and you start with the easy maneuvers and work your way up to the harder maneuvers. They're all pretty tough. But that's a representation for what everyone does. So while it's a completely different mission, dealing with press, and my crew chiefs installed a little lip gloss holder for me in the cockpit, which was awesome. Basically Velcro, but because we like fly 4 hours from Vegas to Atlantic City, and you get out and like there's someone with a camera in your face to like interview about the weekend air show. So it's like Jackie Cochran, who was the founder of the WASP, was like, make sure you always have your look good when you get out of the airplane. So I know it's a little sexist, but I think it's kind of cool too. So
I think it's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the mission was different. The pace was really high. It felt like a combat pace. Mm-hmm. Like, you're in a different city all the time. The ramifications for screwing up when you have, probably a couple thousand people filming you that could go on YouTube within 5 seconds if you do something wrong. Like, there was a lot at stake. So a lot of the pressure and the pace was really similar to a regular fighter squadron and going to combat. But you got to work really close too with, your crew chief. Like, I didn't set any of my switches or handle any of my gear. Like, we had aircrew flight equipment and crew chiefs, and my crew chief would set my switches. And there's certain switches in the F-16 that they're red guarded, and they have to be in the right position when you start the aircraft, or bad things can happen. And you trusted them to do all of that for you. And some things were like personal pilot preference, and like they knew where to put my armrest and how high my seat should be. And
like too high. No, perfect. Yeah. All right. Got it.
Well, and then when we're like doing our ground ops, we're just looking straight ahead if you're in front of a crowd. So you have to do everything by feel too. So that's why it's important that everything's set up the right way. So that teamwork and that trust was something that was just a level up.
Oh, sorry. Do you feel the pressure? You mentioned that there's a lot of pressure to perform, right? It's a different kind of pressure. It's not necessarily people dying, but it's media exposure, and whether it's embarrassment or just a mistake that just is really bad. Do you feel that pressure before? I feel like it's kind of like an NFL player, like preparing for a big football game every single week, right? Yeah. Like, you got so much pressure, you train, and then, like we talked about earlier, you got to perform. You either do or you don't, and you constantly have to perform at air shows. And do you feel that pressure all the way up until you get in the cockpit, and then you kind of sit there and you're like, all right, it's game time, and it all kind of goes away?
Yeah, I think it's more game time. And before it starts, there's like a whole like ground thing, and you turn around, and like some of the shows had 400,000 people like standing or like were there. So you'd be like looking at all these people, and you can see them talking and pointing at you and stuff like that. But yeah, once you like once that engine starts cranking, like you're on duty, and the more repetitions you get, and the further on in your tenure there, you get like being out by an inch feels like a mile. And so your self-preservation kind of goes away because you trust the boss and you know exactly what he's going to do, and you trust your teammates. So it kind of helps to take the nerves away. But it's funny because your community, you know, with a lot of pilots that are listening, most people don't know if you mess up anyway. And
you know if you mess up, but no one else does, right?
You know for sure. We had like a practice day. My first air show was at Sun and Fun, and it was a practice day. But there was like however many people are at Sun and Fun on a Thursday were like watching us practice. And we did an echelon turn, and there was like a compression, and I was like out. I was in the front page of the paper the next day was like this 2+2 formation. Like they thought it was like the most beautiful formation. I was embarrassed beyond belief. Like that was the most embarrassing thing that's probably ever happened to me in my life.
They thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah,
and the
like,
front
look at
page,
that
and you're
perfect
like
2+2 formation. No, it's supposed to be 4 aircraft, like all, you know, like one on one, like kind of sandwiched together. So
needless to say, I shouldn't look for that front page on the background.
I've looked for it. I can't find it.
Yeah.
Hopefully. But the other funny thing is that, you know, you'd get like, and it was usually like a 16-year-old kid who'd come up to you and be like, what happened on takeoff? When you got a little bit aft, you're like, come on, dude. Like, so they'd give us a hard time. So I kind of keyed in on that. And like, if I had a friend who'd come through the autograph line, I was like, hey, when you talk to 4, ask him why he was deep in aft on takeoff. And you could see his face fall. It's just like jokingly like plant little palms for them
Got
just
him.
to keep it fun. But yeah, it was funny. You'd get these like younger kids kind of critiquing like, why did that go wrong there? Like, give me a break because I'm human. There were birds.
It looked like the last show you're at. What'd you do wrong?
Yeah, seriously. Like it's, you know, minor details most people don't know. So.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah, but the team looks amazing. Like they've done some great things, and there's been awesome collaboration between the Thunderbirds and Blue Angels since COVID, and they've really stepped it up. I'm super proud of them.
Is there a rivalry at all between the two? Is there like, I know we're better than you, or was historically there a rivalry at all?
Yeah, of course. A lot of people, you know, they're like, oh, you were a Blue Angel. And I'm like, no, I was a Thunderbird. It's like a Blue Angel, but
Even
better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I made friends with my counterpart who was Blue Angel 3 when I was Thunderbird 3. And, you know, like one day we must have been in a, like close to a Navy community or a coastal community. And I got asked if I was a Blue Angel like 10 times that day. And I texted Nate. I was like, hey, do you ever get asked if you're a Thunderbird? And he wrote back all the time. And I was like, okay, thanks. So, you know, my son had this like die cast Blue Angel that he would not go to sleep without it. I would take it and hide it in the bottom of the toy box, and he'd like pull it out. And I'm like,
you're like, you want to be a Thunderbird? They're better.
give me a break, man. Yeah. So,
it's just because it's blue, right? Kids love blue. That's the only reason. Yeah. Thunderbirds, all the way.
But so there is rivalry, but you know, there's a lot of crosstalk. There's a famous picture, if you've seen, of the Thunderbird who's like ejecting out of the plane, like right before it impacts. The Blue Angels had a mishap that was kind of similar to that one, where the pilot did not survive. So, you know, things like that, learning from our mistakes, that crosstalk has been established there. So it can keep everyone safe, and definitely a lot of mutual respect more than competition. But it's just
always fun to have some kind of rivalry, right? Yeah.
You got to give people a hard time. It's fun. Like there's rivalry within the team between the diamond pilots and the solo pilots, or like the right side versus the left side, or, you know, it keeps things fun.
Was being a Thunderbird everything you thought it would be?
No. I thought it would be all about the flying, and it was 5% flying and 95% relationships and interactions with people, like whether it's people in an air show line. Sometimes if it's a big crowd, they will crush kids up by the fence because they want to get your signature. And it's just like how do you manage that kind of thing? Or, you know, you maybe had an issue with one of the other teammates, and just having to start over and reset every day when you come in, focus on the mission, because that's what's most important. Like whatever kind of tiff is going on between you, that doesn't matter. And then interacting with, like, I had a lot of generals. I started out as a major, and I pinned on lieutenant colonel my last air show. But I had all these like generals in my backseat, and where I would have been like scared before, I'm like they need me, you know. They're gonna think I'm awesome. They're gonna be really happy, you know, when this whole thing's over. So you know, that kind of changed my perspective on things. Yeah.
I mean, it's awesome. I mean, just talking about your career, I mean, I feel like we could talk for hours and hours and hours, and someone's going to let us just be like, why don't you ask more about this or that or that? But like, so we'll have to do more. But
I'll come back on. I also flew the T-7A Red Hawk, which is
That's sick.
Yeah, there were only 2 aircraft that existed at the time. They're experimental. Boeing owns them, and they've delivered a couple aircraft now. But I got to fly 5 hours in it, and I got to go to General Brown's change of command when he became the chief of staff of the Air Force.
That's sick.
Yeah, and we had the T-7 was sitting in the background, so I got to go through all the academics and the sims. And I only flew it 5 times, but I was I was really in charge of business development for the program. I wasn't there primarily to fly. So it was awesome to get to do that. I was the first woman qualified to fly in it. They didn't let me fly it, unfortunately. Like, I didn't get to take it solo because they only had 2, and like all the tests revolved around those aircraft being able to fly, and they could not answer the mail if I did, blew a tire or something like that. Not that I would have, but they didn't want to take a chance. So Man. I forgive them. They were awesome to let me fly. Yeah. It was really cool.
That's so cool. I mean, just the opportunities that you've had and the opportunities to be, the person that you saw when you were going to lacrosse to watch the air show, right? Like, did it ever come to you and did it ever hit you that you were doing what inspired you to get into the military and to fly?
Absolutely. And the biggest moment that illustrates that was, I'm not getting choked up. It is giving me goosebumps. When I was a freshman at the academy, academics were really hard for me. Mm-hmm. And I got a 2.2 grade point average my first semester.
Oh, dang. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. I know. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And I was beating myself up. And I was like, why the heck did I go through all this pain, all these years? I could have been out hanging out with my friends,
or a normal school and drink every weekend,
doing something else. And I worked so hard. I've only done 1 year. I've literally gave it like 210%. I don't know if I can even make it through 3 more years. They do get a little bit easier, but at that moment I just finished finals, and that graduation week was coming up, and I was walking across the terrazzo, or the campus at the Air Force Academy, and I'm like head hanging down, feeling really sorry for myself. And there was this this rush go by, scares the crap out of me. I look up, and no kidding, it was a Thunderbird going between the chapel at the Capitol, it was a Thunderbird going between the chapel at the Air Force Academy. It's got all the spires on the top, and then the front range. It's like this beautiful white chapel, and then the mountain background, and then this F-16, red, white, and blue F-16 going through that. And in that moment as a cadet, I was like, that's what I'm here for. Because I might not make it, but I'm not going to let anything take away my opportunity to maybe get to fly a fighter someday.
I love it. What a great mentality.
Yeah. And fast forward to 2012, when we showed up for the Air Force Academy graduation, I dropped down to fly my lines, and I hadn't even realized it till I did it. I was the jet flying between the chapel and the front range. And I just hope that my service and what I did was inspiring other cadets the way it inspired me.
I'm sure it has. I mean, how could it not, with everything that you kind of talked about right now and what you've been able to do and accomplish? And still, what you can do and how you're telling your story, whether it's through a podcast or whether it's through motivational speaking or whether it's just talking to other girls in aviation or guys in aviation, or if it's your son saying what your mom did, who knows the other sophomore girl that could be there, boy, that's like, oh, that's cool. If your mom did that, I want to do that. So just what you did is awesome. And it's an honor to talk to you. I have a couple more questions and we'll go like one or two. But for someone that's accomplished a lot in the military, that's done a lot in the program, that's someone, you've reached a lot of dreams for a lot of kids that kind of think like, I want to be a Thunderbird pilot, or I want to fly in combat, or I want to do this. What overall would you say makes a good Air Force pilot or fighter pilot or just any pilot in the military?
Determination and being devoted to it, and like we talked about before, just the ability to take a failure and continue to move. On the Thunderbirds, we like to joke like you're only as good as your next pass. Like you might have done the best echelon turn, but you have like 10 more maneuvers, so you have to do everything well. And I mean, a lot of your folks have been in simulators, right? And you screw something up, you can't like harp on, oh, I messed up that approach or that landing or whatever the event was. You have to new jet, new J, restart in your brain, Control Alt Delete, and go. So that ability when you run into roadblocks where you stumble, just having the confidence and the courage to try again.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And I think that's huge in anything in life too, right? There's so many parallels between sports and flying. That's just crazy. I mean, just what you're saying just reminded me of playing football and just everything that they tell you, I was a quarterback, you throw an interception, short memory, you got to keep going, you got to go. And that's, you can take that into life. You can take that into the military. You can take that into flying, just being able to persevere. There we go. Can't say that word right? But being able to persevere and continue. And a lot of people, this is kind of like a segue and getting off track a little bit, but a lot of people kind of ask about a podcast, right? Like, how did you do it? What's the point? It's like, honestly, it's just continuing to do it. Like, there was never like a moment, like a one episode or one thing that made it kind of pop off or do well, but it's just the fact that you don't stop. You don't have many people listen right away. You're not going to make sponsorship money for a while, but just continuing to do it and put yourself out there. And eventually people are like, oh, this podcast's been around for a while. I've listened to this, not bad. Or, oh, wow, he actually got better. He was awful. I couldn't listen to him before, So it's just continuing to show up. And if you show up every single day and continue to come back, you're already doing way more than a lot of people.
Yeah. A lot of people do quit. And that's why the motivational, inspirational speaker will never go out of business, because there's always going to be someone who just needs a little bit of extra boost. And to see, athletes who you admire, pilots you admire, or other folks who've faced adversity, and I think people are really surprised when you see someone who succeeds at a high level that they've had to face those things. I think being open and transparent when you're asking, like when you find that mentor, ask them like, hey, what are times that you failed and how did you handle it? Because everybody has that experience in their life.
Absolutely, because everyone's going to have you. Absolutely,
that's a determining factor
for sure.
Yeah.
Last question. What's next for you? Kind of encompass everything that you've accomplished a lot, right? Like if you just walked away from it, you've had a good career, you can essentially do whatever you want and look back and be like, dang, I did that. And not many people can say that they have done or even touched what you did. But it sounds like you want more. So talk a little bit about what you're working on, what you're doing, kind of goals, and what you're planning on.
Okay. Thanks. I've been introduced a couple times. I actually was just inducted into the Wisconsin Aviation Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's sick. Congratulations.
October. Yeah, and it's exciting because, I know it's one of the 50 states, but I mean, the home of the EAA, and Billy Mitchell, who's the father of the Air Force, is from Wisconsin. Lance Sijon, Richard Bong, who was the number one ace of all time in the United States, all from Wisconsin. So
that's sick.
There were a lot of fighter pilot aces too that were from my home state here. So that was awesome. But it's been interesting being retired from the Air Force, but it's given me a lot to be able to kind of explore in creativity. And I really enjoy interactions with people. I also have a podcast that I just started. We have 4 episodes out now.
Cool.
And it's called All Fire, No Smoke. And it's with me and another pilot named Meryl Tengestal, who was also known as the Dragon Lady.
That's a sick name.
Yeah, she was a U-2 pilot, and the U-2 is called the Dragon Lady, and she's the first and only Black woman to fly that. So she flew
good for her.
Up in space, and she started out in the Navy. She flew helicopters.
What a badass.
Yeah, total badass. She was on Tough as Nails, the TV show, too, at one point. And so we kind of have her experiences with the Navy and spy plane and being in space compared to me, who's like an air-to-ground fighter and a low-altitude demo pilot. And we both have families and how we kind of navigated. And I don't know, we laugh a lot. She's hilarious. So I wish I was as funny as her, but she brings it up a notch. So that's really fun. And then I wrote a book about my experience with my son when I was on the Thunderbirds. It's a kid's book, though.
Oh, cool.
He wanted to fly with me. And he said, I want to go with you. And I said, you can't. He goes, but what if I turn into a mouse? Then I can like hide in the cushion. So the book is called Thunder Mouse. And it's about a little boy who gets the help of a mouse to sneak into mom's flight bag when she goes to work. And then Thunder Mouse like sneaks out and like looks at all the cross country flights and all the air show demonstrations and comes home at the end of a trip and like crawls into the boy's room and whispers in his ear. So he dreams about flying with his mom when he's asleep at night.
That's so sick.
Is whispering to him. So that's, it's been great. It's really well received. And I self-publish, so it's growing all the time. And I just published a audiobook. My website for it is thundermouse.shop, where you can get that. And everyone's like, oh, I want a t-shirt, or I want a sweatshirt. So I'm slowly adding those items too. So that's been really fun. And then I have been doing corporate speaking, which is great. Again, going into a team that maybe they're doing great, but need more motivation, or helping people kind of solve problems and see themselves in a different perspective through sharing some of my experiences as a fighter pilot and leadership and being a part of some, first-rate teams.
Yeah. And possibly flying again?
Yes. So being a single mom, has been really tough to fly. That was part of the reason that I ended up retiring when I hit retirement eligibility. So he just turned 16, got a driver's license, he can be spending a little bit more time with his dad, who's a Delta pilot. So I'm going to go back and start with tail wheel endorsement.
Oh, sweet. There you go. You're doing it for fun then, huh?
Well, yeah, but I don't know. I'm thinking about some other opportunities. I won't throw any company names out there, but I'm thinking about now that I can have a little bit more ability to be gone and getting back into that. But I really want to fly the aircraft that the WASP flew. So I'm a member of the Minnesota Commemorative Air Force. And my friend Mickey, who's a 103-year-old WASP, flew the B-25. It's her favorite plane. And I want to hopefully get checked out in that while I can ask her questions about it, because she remembers everything. So
I love it.
Yeah, it'd be neat to kind of represent those women modern day flying the airplanes that they flew and get to tell their
stories.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know them.
Yeah.
So I'm an author, and that's my memoir. I think is going to be about my relationships with these women, and it's funny. We sit around the campfire, sit around, have a glass of wine, and we're kind of trading stories, and things that happened in 1942 happened to me in 2012. So I think they're pretty amusing, and there's a lot of similarities, but it helps highlight how wonderful and unique and how groundbreaking they were.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And it's just really cool to see you be able to share those stories. And like you said, the book sounds great. It sounds like a book my kid would love, Thunder Mouse. So I might have to check that out.
Yeah.
And I also love how you kind of just briefly mentioned just how crazy this industry is for families, for kids. I just recently started with an airline. I flew corporate before, and just being junior can be really hard on a family. I always tell people, when you're getting into this industry, just find someone that really understands it, because this is a tough industry to be married to someone in, and it's a tough industry to raise a family in. So
and
you got to count on each other.
It's hard by itself, but
absolutely.
And I have friends who have done it and who do it, and I know my son's going to be graduating from high school in 2.5 years. And I have missed flying. It's like my yoga, it's my meditation.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to getting back to it, but I will never regret the kind of little hiatus that I took to spend time with him. So I'm happy for what's happened, and I'm really excited about the future.
Well, I'm excited for you too. It was a lot of fun having you on. I really appreciate you taking the time with me. And like you said, there's many more podcasts I feel like we could do, and we can just kind of dive into to subjects about it, because the way you share it, the way you tell it, and what you've accomplished is just really cool. So thank you for coming on. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it was great to talk. So I wish you the best of luck in everything you do. And if I can ever help out, let me know.
Thanks, Justin. Likewise.
Yeah, anytime.